Bet you can't guess what this video is about.
You got yourself a bet, baby.
Hello class, welcome back to Trope School. Today we are talking about dare dating, also known as bet dating. Now this trope is sort of arguably just a subsect of fake dating, but I asked and 2/3 of you said that you wanted it to be its own video, and I'm a giver, so here we are. So like fake dating, dare dating is based on the premise that the relationship is disingenuous. Only in sort of traditional fake dating, it's both parties are in the know, whereas in dare dating or bet dating, it is usually just one member of the party that is being fake and the other person has no idea. And this trope is actually quite fresh on my mind because I just read a book with this trope, and I also just watched a really random movie on Netflix that had this trope. However, dare dating is actually the basis of a lot of very classic and very well-loved rom-coms. Apparently it's also really big in fan fiction. That's what I hear on the grapevine anyway. That's what the kids tell me. That's what the happening kids over on those fan fiction sites tell me. So it's clearly a really well-loved and still a very, very popular trope. There is an elephant, though, that I think we need to get out of the room before we go on, and that is obviously this trope by nature is pretty toxic. So before the little keyboard warriors get out and start telling me off for supporting a toxic trope, you know, it's fiction, babe. Chill out. If in real life you ever find out that someone you're dating is seducing you or dating you for humiliation for a bet or because they're getting paid for it, please dump them and run away as fast as you can and have some self-respect, okay? Dare dating is probably one of my favourite romantic tropes ever. There's something so deeply exciting about it, which does make you think, like, why is a story about a romance starting with deceit so compelling? For me personally, I think it's the concept of the transformation, how you're going to start in a place that's based on something fake and you're going to end up somewhere that's really, really real. Because to be honest, with any story you're consuming, the reason you're consuming it is for the plot, is for the story. Do it for the plot, girl. The whole point of consuming a story is to see someone develop, to go from one state to a different state. And I think this is why Enemies to Lovers is also so beloved, because you are going from people who literally hate each other to people who literally love each other. I think that's where dare dating and fake dating generally, but dare dating is juicier to me. You're going from a relationship that's starting in deceit to a place that is, hopefully, depending on the ending, very, very pure and very loving. And that's just exciting to watch or read. Because some romance tropes are just sort of little sprinklings that you can put in, like almost little cliches you can sprinkle in. Things like only one bed, taking care of someone when they're sick, that kind of thing. Or you can have tropes which are more sort of character dynamics, things like grumpy sunshine, good girl, bad boy. But with certain tropes like fake dating and dare dating, it's such a meaty trope that it is effectively the entire story. It's not just a little subsect of the story, it is the full story. But that doesn't mean that every dare dating story is the same story. In fact, when I was thinking about all of the examples in dare dating, even stories that have the same sort of premise, I found to be very, very different. There's so much variation that you can do within this story structure, to the point where even though it is done a lot, I am in absolutely no way satisfied by the amount of dare dating stories out there. I need more dare dating movies and TV shows and books. Give me more.
It's Britney, bitch.
Give me more. So as I say, this trope can be set up in quite a few different ways. I've condensed it to about 5 starting points. Let me know if you have examples of any other setups for this, but here are the 5 that I have got. So the first is the sort of Pygmalion My Fair Lady setup. This is the She's All That setup, which is basically a makeover transformation. So this would start with someone bringing another person up to their sort of social level, I guess. So in She's All That, he's trying to prove that he has enough influence to bring up anybody of a lower social standing and make them prom queen. The second starting point is sort of the opposite of that. So if She's All That is going to take someone lower and bring them up a level, this next one is you're going to take someone and bring them down to your level. So this is, I guess, what I would refer to more as the seduction. This is arguably probably one of the cruelest setups, and it is generally the bad boy is going to seduce this prissy, pristine, usually virginal good girl, because they're going to prove that they can seduce anyone. So this is what happens in After. This is the setup for Cruel Intentions. Based on the fact that this is what's used in After, I'm going to assume that this is probably a popular setup in fan fiction as well. Like I say, this is really quite a cruel setup, and I think you have to be really careful with it. However, I do think there is a crueler setup than the seduction, which is just pure revenge. It's like enemies to lovers, but the plot of getting from enemies to lovers is to seduce them, fake date them. Like the outset of the plan is to humiliate them because you hate them and because you want revenge on them. This is basically the plot of Overboard, which is a pretty old movie, but they did do a gender swap version, which I never actually saw a few years back. It's also part of the setup for Mr. Malcolm's List and John Tucker Must Die. However, I do find that revenge usually goes hand in hand with something else to kind of lessen the blow of how mean it is, which is number 4, just social validation and peer pressure. For example, in two of the things I mentioned, Mr. Malcolm's List and John Tucker Must Die, the setup is based on revenge because these girls or this girl has been jilted and humiliated by this man in love. So they recruit a third party to then do the same in return, to seduce them and humiliate them and break their heart. So in John Tucker Must Die, the reason that Brittany Snow's character seduces John Tucker is for social validation, because she's new to school, she has no friends, and by doing this, she will make 3 friends and have some social validation in her new school. And then we have the 5th setup, which is basically based on someone's being paid for it, a la 10 Things I Hate About You.
You're gonna pay me to take out some chick. Mm-hmm. How much?
Or because it's their job. Like the setup for Failure to Launch and No Hard Feelings are the same. It's like parents paying someone to date their child for whatever reason, to give them confidence, to get them out of the house, to make them move out. I remember reading a book years ago, got no idea what the book was, but the setup was, it was for their job in the sense that they were like a spy or an undercover investigator, and in order to get intel and break into this social circle undercover, they pretended to date someone. How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days as well does this. It's obviously a really clever subversion of dare dating because they're both doing it to each other, but both are doing it for work. One person has to write an article for the magazine they work at, and the other is doing it to prove that they can sell love so that they can lead the marketing campaign or whatever.
Done.
What?
Done. Done.
So why is dare dating so good? Why do we eat it up like Ramsay Bolton's hounds in Game of Thrones? As I touched on before, I think it's really because of the satisfaction of the transformation. You're always guaranteed to get a pretty decent character arc from it. Someone's probably going to go from cruel and mean to probably falling in love and being nice. And there's usually like a lot of battling with guilt as well, which is always really juicy to watch. But I think for me, the reason that I prefer, well, I don't know if I prefer it, but I think dare dating is just juicier as a plot than general fake dating, is just because the stakes are higher, like high risk, high reward. Do you know what I mean? Like the whole way through the story, you're waiting for this inevitable fallout to happen. And the better told the story is, and the more they actually bond and fall in love, the more severe the betrayal is going to be, and the juicier the whole third act fallout is going to be.
My bet? Am I a bet? Am I a fucking bet?
Like if you're watching or reading a dare dating story and you get to the point where the person finds out that they were a bet and you're just kind of like, okay, then that story did not do its job well enough in developing the relationship between those two characters. Again, as I mentioned before, I think it's quite easy to make your version of dare dating quite unique. So I always kind of like it when there is something a bit different thrown in. Like in After, the fact that you don't find out what's going on until the end with the protagonist, I thought was really interesting, because usually it's, you know, as an audience member exactly what's going on all the way through. So I think After actually did a really good job in holding that information back. As I mentioned in 10 Things I Hate About You, this is probably one of my favourite subversions of it. And I think it's one of those things you don't really consider it dare dating at first. I think it's so clever that they do it to each other, because it sort of cancels out the power imbalance and cancels out some of the cruelty, because it's not a victim and like a perpetrator. They're both doing the same thing to each other. Did I just call it 10 Things I Hate About You? I might have called it 10 Things I Hate About You. I meant How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. But in How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, they're doing it to each other. Although I do think Matthew McConaughey's trying to make someone fall in love with you is worse than Kate Hudson's I'm just going to give this guy a few bad dates so he dumps me. I do think one is worse than the other, but they are deceiving each other at the same time. Another sort of twist on the trope I love is like when the person doesn't actually fall in love with them. I don't want that to happen all the time. Most of the time, that is what I want. But like John Tucker Must Die, she doesn't actually fall in love with John Tucker. Spoiler alert, I mean, the movie's really old. But that's genius. That's genius to me. She doesn't fall in love with John Tucker. She falls in love with Penn Badgley. Same. I would do the same. And the best versions of dare dating, the best versions of just any love story in general, is just how believable the emotional connection is and how believable the people falling in love with each other is. I think this is why 10 Things I Hate About You is so beloved, because like Kat and Patrick are very, very equal people. They're both very like off-putting. You know, she doesn't just jump at the fact she's being asked out. She pushes him away. He has to work for it. And in working for it, he kind of falls for her for real. I also think in 10 Things I Hate About You, it's a much tamer setup. They're strangers. He doesn't know who she is before he agrees to do it for some extra cash. So I think that allows you to forgive Heath Ledger's character, and you never really blame him throughout the story or think he's cruel, because the setup itself isn't that cruel from him. It's cruel from like the villain of the story, which is Joey. Is that his name? But Heath Ledger's character, he doesn't have cruel intentions. Unlike the movie Cruel Intentions, which I think is another really well told and beloved story, because it is such a cruel setup and it's about such bad, evil people. But what I think Cruel Intentions does really well is that it leans into how horrible these people are. And you get such a satisfying character arc from this person who is just selfish and manipulative and like tears people down for entertainment, to a person that has great remorse, genuinely falls in love and genuinely feels regret for what he's done. And it doesn't end in a happy, lovey-dovey ending. The two evil people get their comeuppance at the end of that film. It's not really a romance because of that, but I think it is a really clever way to just solve the problem of we've made these people too mean. So I feel like the trope fails if it does the opposite. If the setup is really, really cruel and then like the punishment doesn't fit the crime, then I think you're ultimately going to feel a bit let down by that. Also, I'm always really let down. Again, this isn't specific to the trope, but specific to all romance. But it's super important in this trope because of the sort of cruelty and toxicity involved in it, is if the relationship is not deep enough and not believable enough, if it's just sort of based on surface level lust and the person forgives them for doing something really cruel, I don't buy into it. The book I just read, which was The Good Girl Complex, I felt did this. My personal opinion, I felt the relationship was very much based on surface level lust, which didn't give enough oomph, I think. Oh, there is one point I did leave out when I was mentioning punishment matching the crime. An example of where I think this failed in the sense that it has not aged well with modern audiences is Overboard. Overboard is such a cruel setup, and there's like absolutely no punishment involved at all. And I think back in the day, like the 70s or 80s or whenever that film was made, that was a bit more overlooked. I think now through a modern lens, it's a problem, kind of. I don't know. I haven't watched that movie in a while, but I sense that if I watched it now, I would be a bit like, he should be in jail? No? Another example of where I think it fails, that again is likely probably quite personal to me. I don't know if this is going to be a general opinion, but for me it's when a story is set up to be dare dating and I expect that to be the full juicy plot. I want it to be 10 Things I Hate About You, and it just sort of skips over it very quickly, wraps it up too soon, or it becomes like a back plot to the rest of the story. Again, this happened in the book I just read. Can you tell I was annoyed by this book? The setup was really juicy. The stakes sort of made sense and it was quite glossed over, and the part of the story that was set up to be really satisfying was just so tame and so glossed over. So I think if you're going to do dare dating, you have to do dare dating. Lean into it. That's the trope I've come for, and I want to see it really leaned into. I don't want it to sort of be a bit of a story that you kind of gloss over. Do it properly. Commit to the bit, please. Because dare dating, as I say, is so built in. There's so much meat to it. There's so much angst built into it. With great power comes great responsibility. If you're going to write high stakes, then you have to know how to cook a steak. You know what I mean? And I do suspect that in the future, as audiences become a little bit more sensitive to toxicity and like don't gloss over questionable things as much, there is a chance that the dare dating trope could become a bit tamer, which isn't necessarily a problem, but I do think people might shy away from doing it as much because of the risk of it being perceived as like a problematic story. As I mentioned, I think that's why 10 Things I Hate About You is still quite beloved, because the stakes and the setup were quite tame, like quite forgivable. Again, in How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, I don't know why they have to both have 10 in the title. It's really confusing me. In How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, again, it's aged very well because, again, the stakes aren't super, super cruel and it's mutual. They're both doing it. Whereas stories like I Seduced You Just to Take Your Virginity for a Bit of a Laugh, yeah, they're going to be difficult to tell if you're telling it as a romance. So maybe it'll go one of two ways. Maybe if it's going to be used as a romance, it'll be quite tame. And I think stories where they lean into the cruelty Maybe they won't be romances. It might be sort of more a tale on morality, more like Cruel Intentions. Aged very well, even though it's a problematic story, because it's not romanticised at the end. Unlike Overboard, as I mentioned, which is a very problematic story, but it gets a really romanticised ending. So perhaps we will see a bit more, like I say, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, like mutual deception. How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days is, at least off the top of my head, the only example I can think of where it's mutual deception. I'd love to see some more stories like that. The issue with that is the setup. I think manufacturing a setup for that is believable might be quite difficult. I think they do it really, really well and really, really cleverly in How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. But I would love to see that done again in a different setup. If anyone knows of one, let me know. In general, I'd be interested to know what dare dating stories you've read or watched that I haven't mentioned, because there'll be absolutely loads. In the Love Triangles video, the amount of comments of just stuff that I've never seen. So yeah, let me know which dare dating stories I haven't mentioned, because I know there'll be absolutely loads. And if you want to talk more on Trope, stick around, because we'll be doing fake dating next, which obviously, like I said, is sort of the full trope of this dare dating. So there'll be a bit of crossover there, but we'll get more into the nitty gritty of the relationship development there. I'm sorry if I sound like a man today and I'm a bit subdued as well, because I am in the early stages of getting a bit of a sore throat, but I will see you next class if I'm not off sick. Okay, bye.